appreciate where you're coming from, and I always will respect your anonymity. And you tell me, Dave, I want to give you this, but please don't give my name out or anything that's identifying. And then I don't. And I'll always respect that. But however, there are times I know when you just need to let it off your chest. Well, the Be Candid app is great. Just go to Google Play Store, any of the Play Stores you're familiar with, and just ask for the Be Candid. Just write it in. You can download it. Come to thecommonsenseshow.com. It's awesome. And we got people in there, and I've been in there a little bit here and watching this stuff, and some of it's good. I actually got a story idea out of it this week, so I do appreciate that. But this way you can be totally anonymous, no one can trace you, and you can tell the world your secret. You can be your own personal WikiLeaks, and I think it's really good. And I will tell you that I'm not really one to have secrets, but if I wasn't going to be in full, revelation mode, I would use this app. So go to becandid.com. Okay, this is terrific people. I just love it. And I want to remind everybody, too, that the deep state, and when the American spring starts, we are going to see shortages. You can count on that. So what we need to do is make sure we're prepared. This is why I've aligned myself with Numana. And as I said earlier, Mike Adams has done the comparison test, and Numana beats every other company of its type in every dimension. And they're such good guys to deal with, and that's why I recommend everyone have 6 months to 2 months. And if you can't do that, get a month. If you can't do a month, get a week. But have something. You can have the 72-meal grab-and-go bucket. That's my favorite for people on the run. It's cheap, it's easy, and just grab it and go if you have to bug out. Go to Numana.com/Hodges. And for our listening audience, because we love you so much, and Numana really treats my audience well, you get 5% off. Use the coupon code Hodges NOV5. Reminder, too, a lot happening over on the YouTube channel, and we are expanding operations. And I'll have more to say on that in a later show. But we are stepping up our production because I feel time is short before the showdown is coming this spring. I agree with Robert David Steele and what he said. So you want to make sure that you are prepped. Numana.com/Hodges. Again, boy, I told Doug earlier, it was last week, I told Doug, I've never lived through times like this. I'm in uncharted waters. When I step off the boat onto dry land, I kind of feel like I'm in control. I know what's going to happen. I've lived life long enough. I kind of get the lay, but no, this is crazy. And this is why we appreciate you tuning in, because we're all learning together. I learn from the things you send me during the show. Sometimes you give me good questions to ask. I hope you're learning from our guests. So very, very important stuff. Anyway, we're showing her in the commercials this week, this hour. I planned it this way because we have such a hot topic. We have with us Jon Robberson, and he is the producer of the Hagman and Hagman Report that's heard here on Global Star Radio Network. Global Star, and right here, how many great people do we have associated with this network? It's incredible. But Jon has also got a Hollywood background, and that's where we're going to spend our time. So I'm going to let Jon come in here. We're going to introduce him and have him tell you about his background. Jon, welcome to the show. We're so glad you could join us.
Well, Dave Hodges, thank you so much, and it's truly an honor and a blessing to join you here this evening and really just kind of dive into the deep end with what's going on in Hollywood and how it affects where we are today with the new media, etc. And I just want to say greetings and God's blessing to everyone worldwide listening to the Common Sense Show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, tell everyone about your journey a little bit. I mean, you weren't a producer for the Hagman Hag Report a few years ago. You were doing other things, really very, very interesting things. Not that this isn't interesting, but it's going to form the focal point of where we're going to go tonight. So tell people about who Jon Robberson is and where you've been.
Thank you so much. I'll do just that. Folks, I am a 16-year veteran of television and feature film production in Hollywood. I began my career in January of 2000 on a little low-budget Fox Searchlight production that was actually what we would have called in the 70s and 80s a movie of the week. And it was about what happened to the young child actors from the hit TV show Different Strokes from the 1980s. So I began my career in January of 2000, and the last production that I worked on, and it is the production, Dave, that I was summarily dismissed from, and that ultimately devolved into my being blacklisted from the entire General Electric quote-unquote family of production companies. That would be Universal, Focus Film, NBC, and Comcast. And my last production, again, was September of 2015, and that was a primetime television show for NBC called Superstore. And so over the course, Dave, of those 15 years, I was blessed to work at really one of the highest echelons in Hollywood of production. I worked for Spielberg. I did Catch Me If You Can for Steven Spielberg. I worked on the first Pirates of the Caribbean for Disney with Jerry Bruckheimer. I worked on a feature film for Joel Silver. Did 5 seasons of the ABC Disney primetime show Alias back in the early 2000s for J.J. Abrams, who, of course, has gone on to direct enormous, mega blockbuster feature films. And, Dave, I think what would behoove us and our listeners this evening is if we just take a few minutes and talk about what Hollywood is, especially taking a look at the controlled conditioning apparatus that I would venture to say is one of the most potent weapons in the deep state arsenal. And by way of introduction, I was thinking before I joined you this evening about some of the Hollywood shows I've done over the last 2 years. Most of them have been either at my home base, which is the Hagman and Hagman Report, but I also have done a number of them with John B. Wells on Caravan to Midnight, and did one about a year ago with Josh Tolley on the Josh Tolley Show. And when we look at Hollywood, there's a number of chapters, if you will, that we should consider. And any one of these, Dave, I'm sure you'll agree, we could extrapolate into an entire show with little or no difficulty. But some of the things that I'd like to touch on this evening, I'd like to speak with an emphasis, as I said, on the controlled conditioning that is Hollywood, because that affects everyone today. Even if you're not a big television viewer, even if you're not down at your local multiplex every weekend, the controlled conditioning element is a profound part of the deep state agenda that is ultimately moving us to an Agenda 2030 world. And of course, within that, we have to at least touch for a moment on the occultic aspect of Hollywood, the fact that Hollywood, in its mildest form, presents human problems, human disposition, with humanist solutions. That operates, of course, completely outside of any biblical truth whatsoever. I'd like to spend a moment on what I call demonic brokerage, which is a big question that's been asked for many years now. Do Hollywood stars, do celebrities, in fact, sell their soul for fortune and fame? I think we'd be remiss if we didn't take a pretty hard look at the pedophilia, the Pizzagate, pedogate stories that are certainly a big part of how Hollywood operates, but also something that I believe is coming to the forefront across the entire landscape of the powers that be, with the breaking story of Pizzagate last fall. And I think that we should probably conclude our conversation this evening having a very stark, frankly very difficult discussion to have about what is known as baby breeders. Baby breeding is an Illuminati, multi-generational witchcraft procedure whereby children are brought into this world with no paperwork, no paper trail. And I'm sorry to say, regretfully, that in some cases, these sort of unknown infants, if you will, are brought into the world and are in fact sacrificed in a Canaanite manner to Moloch, in some cases to garner satanic, quote-unquote, blessing on a given project, typically big-budget feature films.
Yeah, that sounds... Okay, we got a lot of territory, my friend. Let's roll. Where do you want to start?
Indeed we do. Well, let's start with a big question that everyone asks, and they've asked asked me this going back to the earliest days of my career in Hollywood, and that is, how do you get into Hollywood? How do you break into the business? You know, I think most people consider Hollywood kind of this big monolithic wall, and the elite are behind the wall producing all of this content, and there's a line, you know, a country mile long of people who want to get into the business. And over the last, I would say, 5 years of my time in Hollywood, and Dave, those last 5 years were so difficult because from 2010 through 2015, I was quote unquote fully awake. Okay, I was listening to the Common Sense Show fairly regularly, certainly beginning to work to one degree or another with Doug and Joe Hagman over at the Hagman and Hagman Report, and then a little bit later on with John B. Wells and the crew over at Caravan to Midnight. So as you can imagine, I was in a very strange place, Dave, where on one side of the studio gate, I felt like a hypocrite, and on the other side, I felt like a turncoat. Because what I was essentially doing was going to work every day, and with the measure of discernment that the Lord had blessed me with as I re-entered a personal faith walk with my Christian faith and beliefs, I was really taking mental notes day in and day out and realizing the incredible conditioning machine that is Hollywood. And so those last couple of years were a very difficult time. And one of the things that I began to really sort of ask around town about is this concept of people selling their souls. And I was blown back in my chair, Dave, to learn that not only do aspiring actors, actresses, writers, directors, etc., sell their souls, but there is an actual demonic brokerage infrastructure. Satan in his legion army has very powerful demons, very powerful principalities that will interact. It's a supernatural interaction, but it happens in the terrestrial world, Dave, whereby you can, in fact, sell your soul to Satan for fortune and fame in Hollywood. And this does occur. And, of course, some of the well-known people who have actually come out in mainstream media and admitted as much. Katy Perry famously went on record about 4 years ago saying, quote, I wanted to be the next Amy Grant of Christian music, but when I realized that really wasn't going to happen, I sold my soul to the devil. Roseanne Barr is certainly another good example. And the one that really breaks my heart is Bob Dylan. And I'll tell you quickly, you know, personally, I like a lot of Bob Dylan's work. He's a poet. He's a songsmith. But he made 2 records in the early 1980s, Dave, that were just, they were love letters to the love of, that he had found for Jesus Christ. And those 2 records are Slow Train Comin' and Saved. And yet, you can go on YouTube, any of the listeners to the Common Sense Show this evening can go on YouTube and you can see Bob Dylan in an interview with 60 Minutes. And the interviewer says, Bob, you're in your 70s. Why do you continue to do it? And without missing a beat, he says, well, it's a promise I made years ago. And the interviewer kind of raises his eyebrows and says, need I ask with whom? And Bob sort of smiles wryly and he says, with the chief commander. And again, with a measure of Christian discernment, that should give you goosebumps because that is actual biblical verbiage. So yes, there is demonic brokerage that occurs. I know the names, Dave, of some of these demonic principalities that will initiate this brokerage of one's soul for fame. And the contracts typically operate on a 10 or 20-year duration. And interestingly, if you start going back and you start looking at the biographies of people who have admitted this, you will see that the single age that these would-be celebrities and stars enter into these contracts at is 17. And this is important, Dave, because, as I said, the contracts are typically either a 10-year or 20-year contract. Hip-hop artists and rock stars typically take the 10-year contract. I really don't know why. And you'll notice, and many of your listeners probably know this, especially if they follow, you know, a lot of the cultural events, that 27 is a well-known age where many pop music and rock musicians die long before their time. Oddly enough, television and film stars tend to take the 20-year contract. And again, if folks care to, we don't have time this evening to go into it, but simply go onto one of the search engines and type in who died at 27 and who died at 37. And when you see the litany of well-known names, it's just staggering. So I do just want to make this point very clear to all the listeners this evening. Demonic brokerage is a very real thing, and Satan has his agents out all over the place, particularly in Hollywood, and he's ready to make a deal.
So what percentage would you estimate of household name stars have made these deals with the devil?
Well, that's a very fair question, and to give you a very fair answer, I can't place a percentage on it, but what I would encourage all the Common Sense Show listeners to consider is, what more potent weapon can Satan have in his arsenal than what I call a satanic Manchurian? And many actors and actresses admit regularly that before they perform a scene, they allow themselves to be overtaken or overpowered. And in some cases, some of these celebrities have names for what they call their alter ego, or their secondary presence, if you will. Of course, some of the better known ones, Eminem, not only the biggest rap star in history, but he's actually sold the most records of any music star in history whatsoever. The last time I checked, he'd sold over 250 million records. Eminem is known as Slim Shady. You have Beyonce, another megastar. And she's particularly sad, too, because she's one of the members of Destiny's Child. You know, she came up through the church, much like Whitney Houston. Beyonce has gone on record saying that before she hits the stage, she's got to bring in Sasha Fierce. Sasha Fierce is the demonic entity that overtakes Beyonce. You know, a couple of years ago, Dave, we lost Robin Williams, and he went on record numerous times suggesting that he needed this presence to come into him. Denzel Washington is another. And this is sad, because I personally have very much enjoyed Robin Williams and Denzel Washington's work over the years. Lady Gaga is another one. A lot of these demonic names, Dave, have sort of a childlike lilt to them. Gaga, Sasha, Slim Shady, and most recently, John Podesta with quote-unquote Skippy. I can almost assure you, sir, Skippy is a demonic, is either demonic oppression, or in the case of Podesta, it may in fact be full-blown demonic possession. So it's very real. It's very real. The integration of a demonic presence in these people, who then do what? They bring incredible emotional volume to what they do that affects and instructs all of the viewers in ways that they think they should live their life, or things they should aspire to. And Christians especially need to ask themselves, who are they really listening to?
Do you think, well, I'm asking a rhetorical, almost silly question. When we get into the arena of Christian performers, has there been a big crossover there? In other words,
well, Katy Perry,
is Satan yielding his influence with these people too?
Okay, now that we could do an entire show on that. If you look at the ministry of David Wilkerson, who founded Times Square Church in Manhattan, he preached for years on the notion that Christian rock and contemporary Christian music is in fact demonic, based on the tribal beats, and he claimed that missionaries would come home from Africa, from their mission field, and they would say, why is the church allowing this type of music? This is the same tribal beats and tribal rhythms that are used to summon spirits over in Kenya or Mozambique, or wherever their mission field was. I have personal experience with Katy Perry, in as much as my dad is one of the better-known pioneers of Christian rock. My father, Jon Robberson Sr., founded a company in the early 1980s called Celebration Concerts, and through the 80s and 90s, Celebration Concerts really covered almost the entire West Coast. At one point, we worked from Spokane all the way to New Mexico, bringing what at that time was Christian rock, regarded by the church in many cases as an oxymoron. And my dad did some of Katy Perry's shows, so I personally have witnessed Katy Perry lead praise and worship as a 15 or 16-year-old performer. So to see what's happened to her, it breaks my heart. So there is some crossover. The degree, again, I would be speculating.
Now, you said she made a revelation that she sold out her soul. Does that mean there's rehabilitation for her, or is this a statement of resignation?
You know, that is a question. Boy, you've got some great questions for me tonight. I have sought counsel, Dave. I've asked my personal spiritual mentors this question. I've had long discussions with Pastor Flip Benham, Pastor David Langford, both of whom are regulars on the Hagman and Hagman Report. I've picked the brains of a number of men who are, 20, 25 years older than me and much further down their path of spiritual maturity about this. And the best I can come up with is when a man or a woman is saved by the blood of Jesus Christ, they are sealed. Now, this is straight out of the Bible. They're sealed by the Holy Spirit. So the best I can come up with is perhaps Katy Perry in her early days was a false convert. I have difficulty believing that someone who is sealed in the Holy Spirit can then turn around and sell their soul to Satan. And the big question is, can they then be redeemed? And to be honest, Dave, I've seen so many seemingly demonically oppressed people in my 16 years in Hollywood. I would love to believe that they can be redeemed. I certainly don't want to take that type of power or authority away from Christ. But it's a tough question. It really is.
It is. Well, I'm going to revisit a question I asked you and reframe it. Okay? I wouldn't be a very good lawyer, I'm afraid. I know you can't put a percentage on the amount of big stars in Hollywood that are influenced by Satan or even controlled, but let me ask you this for descriptors. A few, some, many, most. What descriptor would you use to answer that?
I would use many, with this caveat that most of the big name talent that I've worked with would fall under what I said a moment ago. They are Manchurians within the demonic army of Legion. And what I mean by that is they may practice yoga, they may practice Reiki, they may practice mysticism, Kabbalah. Very few are actually, scratching out a pentagram in chicken blood on the floor. Very few big name talent are going to admit to being part and party to Santeria, for example. Okay? However, they are equally potent. I often say this about the devil. He doesn't care. If the right don't get you, the left one will. He wants your soul. And if he can take it through straight up Satanism, he'll do that. If he can take it by simply leading you to believe, Dave, that what Hollywood expounds, that human problems can be solved with humanist solutions. Either one, brother, is a straight ticket to hell.
When you put it that way, you're absolutely right. We're looking at destination as opposed to methodology. I'm kind of taking a side turn here, but I don't think I really am. When I look at the groupthink collectivist mentality in Hollywood, I mean, it's like they all got to get up when they get their awards and all promote gun control, climate change, I should say, without proof. They have this agenda, and it's like they almost rehearse it. They're all anti-Trump, and a lot of the reasons you'll hear them spout out are illegitimate reasons. I mean, it's okay to disagree with Trump. It's fine. Maybe we should have open all the borders, but they say things that aren't true. What is the hold there? How do they maintain this collectivist groupthink mentality to where you don't hear dissenting Hollywood opinions very often?
Well, that's an excellent question, and like most of your questions this evening, it's got an incredibly broad answer that we could spend a lot of time on, but I'll try to isolate it as such. First of all, we have to examine what they're doing at these award shows. They are worshiping and participating in pagan idolatry. If you take a moment and you look at the 4 or 5 biggest statuettes that everybody craves, you've got the Oscar, the Emmy, the Clio, the Golden Globe, the Screen Actors Guild Award. Most of them have definite roots in pagan idolatry that can really be discovered and investigated just through Scripture. Okay? The Oscar and the Emmy both are pagan idols. The Screen Actors Guild Award is Neptune, god of the underworld. All of those, they call the Oscar a brass doll in Hollywood. It's a very old slang term. When you get your brass doll, you can write your own ticket type thing. These actors and actresses, all part of the collectivist hive mentality, are already participating fully in pagan idolatry. Because you see, Dave, most of these people already have riches far beyond what any average citizen is ever going to realize. Okay, even an unknown actress on an unknown TV show is making a very healthy 6-figure a year income, if not kissing that 7-figure a year. And this is for someone whose face you may recognize, but name you wouldn't even know. That's number one. Number two, Satan must use the most of the talent in Hollywood. They're very self-conscious, but at the same time, they're very self-centered. And that's a terrible dynamic to try to live within, because on the one hand, you live your life to please others to the point of neuroses. But on the other hand, you also believe that the world completely revolves around you. And Satan capitalizes on those things. So what he does is he fashions them all to believe that acceptance into this culture is one of the most important things that they can obtain. And why does he do that? Because in order to believe in and accept redemption through Christ Jesus, Dave, you have to have enough of an individualist mentality, and you have to have enough of a love of liberty to realize that without that individualism and without that liberty, you cannot, by definition, make a willful choice to accept redemption in Christ. And that's why Satan uses that collectivist hive mentality so powerfully in Hollywood.
Boy, it is there. It is really, really there. Does it blend? Here are some things I read every Super Bowl. Whoever performs, they say, "Did you see the Illuminati signals?" Well, I have to say, honestly, I don't, because I don't know what they are. Is there such a thing, and how would we recognize it?
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting you would make this point. And I only rue this fact. I wish we had more time this evening to really get into some of these things. But to answer that question, Hollywood was created and crafted around witchcraft itself. Hollywood comes directly from a bunch of young Jewish entrepreneurial kids, most of whom were fatherless, growing up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan at the turn of last century, late 1890s up to about 1905, 1910. And what these kids did, they were often raised by the maternal side of their family. And in Jewish culture, a lot of the spiritual awareness or training, if you will, comes from either the mother or the grandmother, and particularly in a fatherless home. Long story short, these young Lower East Side tough Jewish kids, they discovered the incredible cash cow that was early film. And what they did was they opened up these storefront locations where they would actually rent from the Edison Company over in New Jersey. They would rent these little 5 and 6 minute shorts, and you can still see them on YouTube today. You know, a good guy chasing a bad guy across the top of a train, that type of thing. This is like 1905, and they learned very quickly, Dave, that the concept of three-dimensional life brought into existence off of a two-dimensional plane was so incredibly mesmerizing. They realized that they had something incredibly powerful at that moment. And in fact, going back that far, before Hollywood was even on the map, these storefronts were called Nickelodeons. Why? Because admission was a nickel. And this hypnosis, this three-dimensional creation of life off of a flat screen was so powerful that often people would go in and sit down, they'd pay their nickel, they would get up, walk out, pay another nickel, walk right back in, and view it again. Nickel being the cost of admission into these storefronts. Odeon being the ancient Greek little g god of the theater. Odeon. Nickel, Odeon. So as early as the Nickelodeons of the late 19th and early 20th century, there was already an element of witchcraft brought into this story. Now, again, I'm going to flash forward and move very quickly here. These young entrepreneurs, many of them, like Adolf Zucker, the founder of Famous Players Lasky, which ultimately became Paramount. Paramount is the oldest studio in Hollywood. They came west to get away from the monopolies of Edison, Tesla, Marconi, and Kodak, Eastman Kodak. So they needed to get away from this monopolistic business model on the East Coast. They came west. They knew, Dave, they had lightning by the tail. And they had been trained in Kabbalah. And Kabbalah is in many cases the ability, it's been inherently used to pass down Druidic witchcraft through the Jewish faith. Now, Druidic witchcraft is passed down through many different religious traditions, but in this case it was through Kabbalah. And in ancient Druidic culture, when they would do their spells and their incantations at places like Stonehenge or the other intersections of ley lines, a very important punctuation to that spell, to that ritual, to that rite, was the waving of the wand. Now, the wand, we trivialized wands as being sort of like a part of a Halloween costume or something, but the wand was an incredibly important punctuation mark in casting these spells. And the wand, Dave, was always made from what in England is known as the Toyin tree, T-O-Y-O-N, the Toyin tree. Okay? The Toyin tree was chosen as the wood with which to make the wands because it is the only tree that remains green throughout the year, and particularly on December 21st, which is the winter solstice. It's the longest, darkest day of the year. And from that day forward, we begin to capitulate into spring. Again, Druidic belief is all about Mother Gaia and the harvest and bringing forth food from the earth. So the Toyin tree was celebrated as the symbol of winter evolving into spring. Okay? So back to our young entrepreneurs. When they came west into the dusty orange groves of Southern California, they realized through their Kabbalistic training that they had the most powerful spell that would ever be cast on humanity, and that is the spell of moving pictures. And it is still incredibly potent and powerful in everyone's lives hearing this show this evening. They knew what they had, and as an homage, if you will, to the ancient Druidic culture of the waving of the wand to punctuate the incantation, they chose to call the new area that they were working in by the name that Americans know, the Toyin tree, which is the American holly tree. And that, my friend, is how the town originally got its name. Hollywood.
What a great story.
It was the
John,
biggest
I've never
spell.
heard that before. What a fantastic
Isn't that incredible?
story.
It's amazing.
It is.
And so and thank you for giving me the time to lay it out. Dave, it's important that people understand this because they need to understand that from day one, minute one, Hollywood has been about witchcraft and about deceiving the masses. Now, let's take a quick look at Paramount, because you asked me about symbology. Yes, Hollywood is rife with symbology. Let's take a couple of just quick looks, and then I want to jump over into the pedophilia thing, since that's so relevant to where we're at today politically and culturally. CBS. CBS is the eye of Horus, the eye of Osiris. It is the all-seeing Luciferian eye, the same as the capstone on the pyramid on the back of a dollar bill. NBC, the peacock feather. It's interesting because the peacocks are actually called peafowl. A female peafowl is a peahen. A male is a peacock. That rainbow tail is a counterfeit of the rainbow, which was God's promise to never again destroy the earth by flood. It has been co-opted by the homosexual agenda, and thus NBC uses the peacock with the rainbow tail as a direct affront to the promise that God gave Noah. Let's take a quick look at Paramount. Paramount is a mountain, okay? It's a mountain surrounded by 22 stars. Now, what's the significance there? Okay, it's just a mountain. Not really. What you're looking at is a pyramid. That pyramid is the pyramidic structure of the global elite, from the low-level Masons all the way up to the Council of Rome, Club of 13, etc. And the 22 stars are relevant in pagan numerology because 22 is the number of creative control and the power of creative deception. So yes, when you begin to discern Hollywood with a limited understanding of symbology and the symbolism therein, it's Luciferian witchcraft, signs and symbols everywhere. And again, that's why those last couple of years for me in Hollywood were so incredibly difficult. You got to figure, Dave, I was spending Thursday evenings hanging around with Paul McGuire at his prayer meetings in North Hollywood, and then Friday morning I'd be right back in the thick of this. It was really a brutal time. And I think that when I really determined that I was going to have to depart this scene permanently, with no education and no job training that translates, Dave, to anything other than media, to some other form of media. I had no idea that I was going to be blessed with the reins of the Hagman and Hagman report. When I began to see what was happening at Disney, my last 5 years in the business, I worked either at Warner Brothers or Disney. I worked on Pretty Little Liars for 3 seasons, and then I went over to Disney where I worked on Disney XD shows, the 3 biggest being Kickin' It. I did season 3 and 4 of Kickin' It. I did season 2 of Ant Farm, and I did the first season of Mighty Med. Those are all big shows on Disney XD. They're watched by millions of kids. Dave, I began to see something happen to these young ladies that just left me cold. It left me chilled. Right about the time they're about to hit puberty, that sort of prepubescent, they call it the tweens, the tween market. And this is, remember, this is what these shows are calibrated toward. Right about the time a little girl starts to develop and starts to begin to sort of become a young lady, all of a sudden, Dave, she's not there on stage anymore with just her stage mom or her stage dad. By law, one of her parents or legal guardians have to be with a minor under the age of 18. All of a sudden, there's 3 people, and then 4, and then 5. And they pretend to be this cadre of professionals. It's the lawyer, it's the stylist, it's this, it's that. What these are handlers. And these handlers are, to one degree or another, they're an integral part of creating a commodity in this human being that the studio and the powers that be will own, not only for the duration of their career trajectory in Hollywood, but in many cases for the rest of their lives. And so we have we've only got about 15 minutes. So we need to look quickly at what's going on with pedophilia in Hollywood and the blackmail component therein. Does that sound good?
Great. And John, I want to encourage you, just take a long breath and relax and have fun with this, because we could do this again sometime in April and follow up on what we don't finish.
Thank you. I know I'm trying to pack.
I know, and you're doing great. I mean, I'm spellbound by this, pun intended. But we'll do follow-ups on this. I mean, this is fascinating, and this is what every parent needs to hear so they can better guide their children.
That sounds like a plan. Let's examine the pedophilia aspect of this, the blackmail inherent in therein, and then we can hit the pause button and save the rest for next time. How's that sound?
Okay.
Okay, let's do it. So, recently, Corey Feldman, big star from the 80s. He did Goonies. He did Lost Boys. He had a close friend named Corey Haim. They were the Corys. Corey Feldman came out recently, and he published a book where he revealed the pedophile aspect of so many of the studio heads, well-known directors, etc. And he even goes as far as to suggest that the drug problems that ultimately ended his friend Corey Haim's life at an early age were a direct result of the guilt and all of the terrible myriad of psychological issues that happen when a young child, much too young for any type of sexual involvement, is preyed upon by these in many cases, older men. But there's a blackmail component behind this. It's not just serving one's depraved sexual needs. It's been well established, and it goes back, some of the early cases really came to the surface in the 1930s. And what they've learned to do, Dave, is they position these young kids in an environment where they have no idea what's going on. And it's an environment where they don't have the maturity to deal with the adoration, to deal with the attention. When you're on a hot set, on a hot show, particularly if there's a live audience component, it is an overwhelming environment to work in. As an adult, I can't imagine trying to process it as an 8, 9, or 10-year-old kid. And so these handlers will befriend these young children, and they are very adept at fostering them through this unusual scene. Okay, it doesn't take them very long to garner the trust of these young men or young ladies. And what follows shortly thereafter, typically drugs are brought into the picture. The drugs of choice lately are the prescription speeds that are, that's a whole other topic, but they're prescribed for, ADD, ADHD, etc. So they will give these young kids Ritalin or Adderall. Those are the two that we hear the most about in Hollywood. But they've also, I've heard many stories of them using other pharmaceutical medications. They always use pharmaceuticals, Dave, because you can get a little kid to take a pill a lot easier than trying to talk them into, trying to smoke a joint, for example. So the meds come to town. These handlers have this incredible influence over the kids, and then what they do is they begin to use the baseline desires of a little kid to position them against their parents, because the parents, who are by law, again, they're supposed to be present, they are often trying to keep the child in some form of proper child development, like any parent would. So these handlers are able to create a distrust factor fairly quickly between the child actor and their parents. Once that distrust factor has been created, it's not hard to do. It's kind of like, come on over here, Johnny. Your mom's a stick in the mud. We just want you to have fun. Now, let me show you how this all works. Once they've got the drug component in place, many different things can happen, but one of the most common is that they will begin to use really heinous sex crimes to split these young kids' personalities. This has been going on for a long time. Of course, it goes back to the Tavistock Institute and the earliest, investigative findings with MK Ultra, etc. But in Hollywood, what often happens is when they've got a young hot commodity, Dave, they want that. They call it talent. They want that talent to be completely beholden to whatever the will of the handlers up through the studio heads, etc., would have them do. And the way that they do it is ultimately they want to get you on tape in horrific sexually compromised positions. When I say sexually compromised positions, I'm talking about very young kids in homosexual scenarios. There's often animal dismemberment, bloodletting, satanic ritual behavior that goes along with all the sex, and unfortunately sex with multiple partners in a compressed period of time. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. Once they have that, Dave, they own that person. They own them. And they own them for the rest of their career, not just for a couple, 3 years, 5 years, what have you. They own them from that point on entirely. That's essentially the model that we're dealing with. And when I was working for Disney, I saw a lot of young kids where you could see from age 11 to about 13, something is dramatically wrong with these kids.
Boy, I don't even know what to say next. I'm speechless, because if the average parent could hear what you're saying right now, no child actors would be in Hollywood.
I would like to believe that's the case, but remember, Satan works up and down the ladder, and some of these stage parents are using their child actor or actress to play out in some sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, vicariously, the ambition that oftentimes the parent was unable to realize. Now, you may have a parent that wanted to be a rock star, but their kid is a Disney actor, so it's not necessarily the same genre. but it's the same overall appeal. I would imagine most of these stage parents would remain as protective over their kids as they can. But another really sad part of the story, Dave, is these stage parents run out and buy multi-million-dollar homes. And, of course, nowadays in Southern California, every home is a multi-million-dollar home. So they get into a situation where, I hate to say this, but in some cases I do believe that to a degree there's a blind eye turned. And you know, when you give over to that level of deception, it's a very slippery slope. Once you've given over to that mentality of a reprobate mind, there's only one way back, and that is through supernatural salvation. The only way back is through Christ.
You know, what you describe about the kids and how they're compromised and how they're owned because of incriminating evidence, it's what I've learned from my late friend Bill Pollack and other authors who have written about books like the Franklin Scandal, where they have identified the same thing with politicians. They get in there, they go to a victory party, they get compromised, and then they're owned.
Indeed, that is. I'm afraid there's more truth in there than not, you know. And it's sad to say, but you know, Andy Warhol famously said in the 1960s that everyone would aspire to or enjoy their quote unquote 15 minutes of fame. And social media, you know, when we look at the millennials and Generation Z following the millennials, I fear, Dave, that one of the big problems is that celebrity and stardom has been misrepresented to be this ultimate goal that one should aspire to. Ironically, and it's really devilish in its irony, most people that have that fame and celebrity, they learn very quickly to disdain it because it robs every bit of freedom you could possibly have, you know. And then, of course, once they've got these young up-and-coming actors and actresses in these compromising positions, there are stories around town that the parents even become aware of what has happened. However, this is where it gets really tricky. They are then threatened with the loss of their child due to negligence. And I know you've done a lot of work on the Common Sense show about that, but a studio exec can easily bring Child Protective Services into an equation, and as you can imagine, it just becomes a god-awful mess.
Do they have like a secret police that enforce the code of silence, so to speak?
I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just the notion of Hollywood secret police. Okay, that's getting into some really sticky territory. What I know about it is this. Dave, many of us who congregate around the Common Sense show, the Hagman and Hagman Report, etc., have this notion that there are these black ops government agencies that can snuff you out in a heartbeat if you cross them, okay? You know, case in point, Breitbart or perhaps Michael Hastings, etc. What they don't realize, and you have to spend time in a media-centric environment like Hollywood or perhaps Manhattan, is that some of the most dangerous people to cross, Dave, are the tech titans and the Hollywood corporate barons, so to speak. You can get smoked by a major corporation. I won't name names, but if you look at Hollywood flow charts, all of the studios are owned by major corporations. You can run afoul and disappear a lot quicker. From what I've seen, by running afoul of one of the big corporations that runs the studios than you can from some government entity. So is there a secret police? There is, but I would almost qualify it more as a private contractor type of arrangement.
Wow.